Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and welcome to WIP Wednesday episode number 117. It always takes me a second to remember what episode we're on. We've done so many of these. Welcome everybody. I'm coming to y'all from my home crafting studio here in North Central Florida, where it was in the mid-20s Fahrenheit this morning. My tomatoes almost froze, but I think I saved the majority of them. I have to prune off some frozen bits off the top of the vines, but that's about it. All right, let's see if y'all can leave me a little quick note. Make sure you can see me and hear me, and let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat box, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook. Let's say hi to some friends. Oh, I see somebody. Oh, Janelle says, I have this heat press in white. Yes, we'll get to the heat press. I'm going to save that one for last so I can show you how it works and some ways that those of you who sew can use it. Okay. Diane says, Crafty loves her gadgets, a woman after my own heart. You know, Miss Diane, I love gadgets. I think we all do. Things that make our lives a little bit easier, that can allow us to finish up, monotonous steps in the creation process of whatever it is we're making. If it can make it a little bit faster, I'm there for it. Okay. Hi, Margie, tuning in from Wisconsin. We got Laura from Wisconsin as well. Josie's tuning in from Washington State. And Leela says, hi from icy Alabama. Hello, everybody. Hi, Kathy. She says, chilling in California. Everybody's cold, I think. Even us in Florida here. All right. Hi, Miss Bernadine, tuning in from New Orleans. Great. Okay, so y'all can see me and hear me. So for today's episode, for those of you that are tuning in new, WIP Wednesday, the WIP stands for Works in Progress. This is just a live show that we do here weekly where I'm usually answering some pre-submitted questions. FYI, if you want to have, or if you want to send me a question that you'd like for me to answer on a future episode, there's a link in the description box if you're on YouTube, and there's a link in the caption if you're watching on Facebook to a Google document that you can type up and submit your question there. Every week when we prepare for this show, we go through there and select some questions to answer. So if you have something pressing, you want to get it to me for consideration in a future show, go ahead and use that link. All right, now I have a couple of pre-submitted questions here that I chose that I'm going to be answering because they don't take quite that long. And so we'll get through those quickly, and then I'm saving the best for last. I have a new heat press, and we'll get to that after we answer these questions. So let's start. The first question I have, and you can send them over to my over the shoulder shot here, because we're probably going to, pull up the sewing machine for a couple of these. All right. So the first question is from Melissa, and Melissa asks, when I piece a block with flannel fabric, the threads seem to be loose at the ends. I have it at 2.5. I'm assuming that's stitch length, so 2.5 millimeters for stitch length, okay? She says, I don't have this issue with regular cotton. It just looks like the ends are going to unravel. Should I use a smaller stitch length? Now, I went through my stash, and I didn't have any flannel. And I probably don't have any flannel. One, because my kids aren't little anymore, and I used to make them stuff with flannel. But two, because it's such a loosely woven fabric that I'm glad you asked this question, because for those of you that are working with flannel or something else that's a loosely woven cotton-based fabric, you definitely want to go shorter on the stitch length. So if you're using 2.5, and there's nothing wrong with 2.5 millimeters, that's a good, base stitch length to be using. Let me go in and plug up the sewing machine real quick so we can talk a little bit about the settings and show you how I change it on the sewing machine. But a 2.5 millimeter stitch length is just fine. However, when it comes to a loosely woven fabric like that, you might want to shrink that stitch length down just a little bit more so that the stitches are smaller, shorter, tighter, meaning it's grabbing those layers of fabric a little bit better. So let's go ahead and use this fabric because I have gray thread on this machine, and so hopefully it'll show up pretty decent on camera. So we always want to test out stitching through 2 layers or more, whatever you're going to be stitching through in your final project, right? We don't really want to be testing our stitches through just 1 layer because that's not going to give us a true representation of what we're actually going to be doing and what it's going to be looking like in an actual project, okay? So I have my stitch length here set to 2.2. I'm going to lengthen it to 2.5 as close as I can get, right? Depending on your machine, you may or may not be able to get to exactly 2.5. But on this machine, I have 2.4. I also have 2.6. So let's go 2.6. And I'm not going to backstitch at the beginning or at the ends, okay? I'm just going to start and keep going straight off the end. Okay, so now I have this, and let me lighten this up a little. Sometimes it gets darker because of the light of the sewing machine, but my stitch Whoop, let me get this in focus for y'all. You can kind of see it there. What I want you to see is that because I didn't backstitch, if I start tugging at the ends, you can see that really I can kind of start separating that seam because there's no back stitching. And that also shows me that the stitch is kind of, it's not that short, okay? It's kind of long. So, and this is a kind of not very loosely woven fabric. I would say that this chambray is maybe a little bit looser woven than a regular 100% say designer quality quilting cotton, but it's not quite as an open weave as a flannel. So because of that, I can kind of separate it out here, but unless I go in and start clipping these threads, you see that it doesn't start separating further down into the seam line. The looser the weave of the fabric, the more easily I'll be able to go like this and tug at it. So that may be why Melissa is seeing that the edges of the fabric are fraying and it looks like it's gonna come apart. So now let's do another test. I'm gonna cut this one off because I wanna use that same edge. And we're going to shrink it down to 1.8, okay, which is just under 2 millimeters, and that is quite small. This is also the seam allowance that I typically use if I am going to be pressing the seams open because I want it to hold really, really well. So think about that. You'll hear me say often in my courses and in my video tutorials that if it's a construction seam, okay, if there's going to be stress on that seam, you want to make sure that you are shortening that stitch length, all right? So let's go again. I'm going to go 1.8 and I'm doing the same thing. I'm starting at the top. I'm going to go straight off the end again, and I'm not going to backstitch, okay? So I'm doing the exact same thing I just did. And I'm not pushing the fabric through either. Sometimes people say, well, I use the 2.5 millimeter or stitch length, or I use a stitch length that you recommended. Keep in mind that although you may be setting it to the same thing as somebody else, if they are working on a different machine, like a different make and model, there's little variances in the actual stitch length. I have machines where I will set it to 2.5 and I swear it looks like 3 millimeters stitch length. I haven't actually measured it with a little ruler that has millimeters, but based on using another machine and 2.5, right, they can vary a little bit in how short they are. But one place that I see a lot of beginners make the mistake is that when they're sewing, they push the fabric through. If you push the fabric through, you're distorting the actual stitch length, okay? Because you're helping it, meaning you're pushing more fabric is going through before it can take another stitch, and you often end up with a way longer stitch length than you selected on the actual machine. So think about that next time you're sewing. Stop and check yourself and see, am I pushing the fabric through or am I letting the machine and the feed dogs pull the fabric through, okay? All right, so now we did 1.8. So now I'm coming to the end here, same thing. And now look, I'm pulling and it's not coming apart. Can you see that? I did the exact same thing. I'm going back and forth, side to side, like I did on the other one, and it's not coming apart. That is simply, you saw it, right? The only difference was I shortened the stitch length. So hopefully that helps you, Melissa, and that helps any of you who are out there maybe working on a project and you're tending to have the same similar issues. The fabric can affect, but also the seam. If it's going to be a seam, like I say, a construction seam, where you're going to be having a lot of stress on that seam, or say it's the bottom of something where it's going to have a lot of weight on it, you want to go shorter to help keep, the integrity of that seam so that it holds together good and doesn't break on you, okay? All right. Oh, Kathy's asking, please remind us of the model of your Juki you are using. This is the little Juki LB5020, okay? We usually carry them in stock. We don't have them in stock right now, so I've just been sharing my Amazon affiliate link for those of you that are looking for it, but it's a great little machine. Those of you that have been watching me here for a long time have seen me use this machine for the past 3 or 4 years now on these shows. I use this one a lot here because I can just pick it up by the handle and just scoot it out my way when I'm doing these types of live shows and demos, okay? Oops, squeaky. Okay. All right. Oh, Winless Original says, great timing. I've plans to sew with some flannel after WIP Wednesday. Awesome. So definitely shorten that stitch length so you get some really good seams, okay? Next question I have is from Vicky, and it's actually specific to this sewing machine model. So let me zoom out. Okay. So LB5020. And Vicky's asking, I use the Juki LB5020, which is this one, and she says, my question is about needle positions. I know you set the needle at 5.0 for a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and that is the width. We'll talk about that in a second, y'all. And then she goes on to say, what is the needle position for 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch seam allowances? So this is something that I tell all my students on whatever machine it is that you're using. Although this question is specific to this machine, here's a little piece of fabric. You can do this on any sewing machine make and model. What we're going to talk about here, is moving the needle position so that it stitches at the exact seam allowance that your project calls for. What does that mean? Well, what she's saying is, she knows that I set mine at 5.0 here for a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Here's what I do. Stitch 0, 0 is a straight stitch. Now, 0, 0 has the needle in the center position, okay? Because this is my machine and I've been using it for years, I already know that the default, meaning I turn the machine off, I turn it on, whatever it defaults to with the needle in the center position to the edge of the universal presser foot that comes on here is 3/8 of an inch. So for you, Vicky, that's now you know, right? You turn the machine on when the needle position is in the center and you're stitching out 0, 0, which is a straight stitch, to the edge of this presser foot is 3/8 of an inch, okay? So I'm just gonna go like this and stitch. For those of you that have different machines, what are you gonna do? Take a piece of fabric, turn off your machine, turn it on, wherever that needle is, take a line of stitching and sew a seam, and then measure from the edge of your fabric to the stitch line, and then you'll know what the seam allowance is with the universal presser foot and the default needle position. Okay, now be careful because not all sewing machines will default and turn on to a center needle position. I used to have some brother sewing machines, I don't know, 15 years ago, that would default to the leftmost needle position because it was designed for garment sewing. So that machine, when you turned it off and turned it on, it defaulted to a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's why I say test it, because it may vary on your different sewing machine makes and models, okay? Different brands and different lines of machines that are kind of marketed towards specific sewists or quilters or whatever, they may vary a little bit. Okay, so we know the center needle position on this machine is 3/8 of an inch, and I know because I know, and I've measured it ages ago, but I will show y'all. This ruler doesn't have 1/8 inch increments, but you can grab one that does, and then you put the ruler edge on the stitch line and then you look to see. So for me, it's just over a 1/4 of an inch and kind of in between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch. Okay, so I know that's 3/8 of an inch. All right, now she asked about 1/2 of an inch. So let's play around with this and see where the 1/2 of an inch is. A couple things, and this applies to everybody with whatever machine you're using. So I thought it was a good question for today because I can share these tips for others of you that don't have this machine. If I zoom in here, you may be able to see these lines on the bed of my machine. Every machine may vary. Like it might just have lines on the metal plate here. It might have lines and measurements on the metal and the plastic like mine does. Your whole thing might be plastic. Your whole thing might be metal. So just familiarize yourself with your machine and see what the measurements are. Now this machine here has both metric and imperial measurements, which is super handy for those of us that live in the US because we go by inches, right? But there's also metric increments on here. On the metal plate here, I see 3/8 of an inch, I see 1/2 an inch, I see 5/8 of an inch. So what does that tell me? That tells me that from wherever I turn on the machine, again, the default needle position, which we already established was the center needle position on this machine, if I align the edge of my fabric with these specific lines, it's going to give me that measurement. So Vicky, if you haven't tried that yet, that's Vicky, right? Yeah. So Vicky, if you haven't tried it yet, try that. If I align the edge of my fabric with this line here, it's the 5/8 of an inch. If I align it with the line here, it's 1/2 of an inch. So let's do that and then we'll measure. I'm going to align it right here. I'm aligning it with the line. Remember, what you align with the measurement guide is the edge of the fabric. The needle is stationary. It's only sewing straight up and down. So if the needle's in the default position, I can now feed my fabric, and we know where we're looking, right? We're not looking at the needle. We're looking at the edge of the fabric. As long as you look at the edge of the fabric and keep it on the guide, you're going to have a perfectly straight seam. So I'm doing that here. That's the 1/2 inch, and we're going to stitch off the edge. Yes, Gloria's saying my Baby Lock Verve has that information in the manual. Most of the machines are going to have it in the manual, but I don't know. For some reason, a lot of people don't like to open that manual. I'm one of those that like reads the entire manual before I even turn the machine on. That's the only thing I read. Y'all know me. I don't read fiction. I only read user manuals. If it's not teaching me something that I want to do right then and there, I ain't reading it. All right, so let me put this mat underneath so we can see this a little bit better. Right there. So I'm placing my ruler on the stitch line, and you can see that it is exactly 1/2 inch. Right here to this dashed line on my ruler is the 1/2 inch. You see it? Boom, boom. This line here is a 1/4 inch. So we have a 1/4 inch and another chunk of 1/4 inch is 1/2 inch. So that is where the 1/2 inch measurement is. If you wanted to change it and say maybe those markings on here are a little bit small, they're a little bit tricky to see, there's several different things that you can use to help you. There are magnetic seam guides. There are pieces of tape. There are some sticky backed raised pieces that they sell specifically for sewists to mark out your seam guide. You could put a piece of washi tape or painter's tape right there to help you out. Or, of course, you can do similar to what I do when I scoot the needle over. Let me zoom this out. As we established at the beginning, I move the stitch width, okay? So I said that at 3.5, my machine defaults the needle to the center position. Well, if I change the width measurement on a straight stitch, right? A straight stitch has no width. It doesn't move side to side like a zigzag stitch. It just goes straight, okay? So if I change the width, it's not gonna jump and change the stitch, right? All it's gonna do is scoot the needle over one way or the other. And that's how we change how far over from the presser foot we position the needle for a line of straight stitching. So when we talked about changing this to 5 mm, that means the stitch width. If I change the width, let me put a darker fabric behind here so you can hopefully see this. Okay, you can see where the needle is. Right here, okay? This is the needle. If I scoot this and I change the 3.5 and I go up to 5, you're gonna see that needle tick to the right some. So keep your eye on this needle, and I'll turn it this way better. Yep, and I'm gonna go up to 5. So we're gonna go up, up, up. You see that the whole thing, I mean, it's because the tip is right on the fabric, so it's pulling the whole thing with it, but it scooted it over. So what does that mean for me now? That instead of the needle being in the middle, right, that center default position, I've moved it closer to the edge of my presser foot. So if I still align my fabric with the edge of the presser foot and that needle is scooted closer to it, it means it's shrinking my seam allowance. So now instead of 3/8, we've made it go to 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means that if I line my fabric up with the edge of the presser foot now, and I stitch my line, because that needle is more over to the right now, I've stitched 1/4 inch seam allowance now. Okay, so that's how we do that. Okay, so hopefully, Vicky, that helps, and try it out. Those of you that have, different machines, if you've never done that before, you might want to jot down some notes and put a little sticky note. If you keep a sewing journal or a notebook, or even on the side of your machine, you can keep a little note for the specific seam allowances, especially if you don't have a lot of accessories with the different types of presser feet that give you different seam allowances. If you're going to be using the main universal foot mostly, and you want to know, hey, where do I need to position the needle to have different seam allowances, but using the same foot, this is how you would do it, okay? So measure, check these, and you still want to check these, okay? Even if you're going to be trying to use the measurements that are on the bed of your machine here, test it out to double check and make sure that it is from whatever the default needle position is, and not like you have to move it to the center and then these measurements count or they match up with that. So be careful with that too. You always want to do a little quick test and check it out for yourself. Take some notes and jot it down. All right. Patrice says, I made it. Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Winless Original says, same. I read manuals before I even buy the machine. That's what I'm talking about. All right. Ooh, Deidre's asking, do you have a tutorial on the sweatshirt you're wearing? I don't. Do you want to put them on my face so I can show them a little bit about it? This is just a prototype. I had some of this Liverpool polyester spandex fabric in my stash, and believe it or not, this is not even actual ribbing fabric. I just used 96.4, so 96% cotton, 4% spandex, cotton spandex, lycra. for the band here. And it has a band on the bottom too. Super cute, comfy. I'm testing it out to see about offering this as a future class. It's a Jali pattern and it has a bunch of different views, like with a hoodie, no hoodie, with the little kangaroo pocket in the front, short sleeve. So I'm trying them out, and so this is the first one I made for myself to check it out. But you can see it's long and has different lengths as well. So thank you. I like it. A little funky and very bright, but that's very me. All right, so let's see real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything else. And then let's move on to the next question. Oh, Ruthie's asking a great question. She says, so do you raise the tension when you lower the stitch length? I don't, actually. I rarely ever touch the tension on my machine. The only time I touch the tension is if I'm using a really, really fine thread and really, really fine fabrics. I will increase the tension so it grabs a little more and I don't have the stitches kind of looping around and too floppy because there's not enough fabric to basically fill in the stitch. The stitch length, right? And so if I'm using a really, really fine fabric, I may play around with the tension and drop it just a little. But no, when you're just adjusting stitch length, I don't even touch it. Okay, great question. Okay, so now the next question I have is from Lavana. And Lavana's asking, she says, I have a lot of no fusible interfacing, she says, light and medium weight. I see that you use a spray adhesive, but what do you do about the overspray? Is it because it's a small bottle that you use that you don't worry about the overspray? So let's talk a little bit about that. And I'm gonna grab my bottle that she's talking about so I can show y'all what it is. This is, and we can give them the over-the-shoulder shot again. Thank you. This is Sulky KK2000. Now this is just a temporary spray adhesive. It's non-toxic. It's an odorless one that has no CFCs or HCFCs, and it says ozone friendly. I've been using this stuff for maybe, I don't know, 13, 14 years or something. It's a small bottle, but you barely need any to get the stuff to stick. It does have a smaller nozzle. Maybe 17 years ago, I think I tried that 505, 404. There's one that's permanent spray that's like for other crafts, and there's a temporary spray one that people use for quilting. I think it's 505. It's like 17 years ago when I worked at Joann's. I had a bottle of that, and that stuff had a ton of overspray. I've never used that again. Once I discovered the Sulky KK2000, this is all I use, but it's a temporary spray adhesive. So this is good for like basting quilt layers together on small projects that you're not going to pin baste or go in and hand baste, and you just wanted to temporarily hold in place so that you can head over to your sewing machine to stitch through the layers, okay? So when we're talking about the no fuse interfacing, which makes it a sew-in interfacing, let me show y'all. I had one on hand that I thought would be a good one to show you. And let me grab the bolt because I do buy this stuff by the bolt, but we've had this for years, huh? This is a Pellon product that you can get at Joann's. I'm pretty sure this is where we got it. And it's a mid-weight stabilizer. This is Pellon 40. That's all the number on it is. 40W sew-in stabilizer in white, okay? So 40W. It says for crafts and home decor stabilizers, and it's 100% polyester, okay? So it's medium weight, so it's not super duper light, but I think we use this one. Do you remember? Is this for the Lorraine bucket bag? I think this is what we use at the bottom of the Lorraine bucket bag. So, yeah. So this, it's not fusible. This is the interfacing. So how do we work with a sew-in interfacing? The idea is that this just gets inserted between layers, right? Behind a fabric that you want to add additional weight to, but it doesn't actually get fused into place, nor does it need to be quilted, right? If you think about quilt batting, and I'll grab a chunk here from my stash. If you think about quilt batting, the manufacturer will tell you on the packaging, hey, this needs to be quilted within 8 inches of itself or 13 inches or whatever, which means that this, also like this, is not fusible and it is designed to be in between layers. But because this is cotton, and this one specifically has no scrim, it has nothing, no sheeting, no tricot or anything that's holding the cotton together. So it needs to be stitched within a certain distance, right? Meaning the quilt lines need to be stitched whatever the minimum distance is so that it holds together. Have you ever seen a quilt that gets washed, even like those cheap ones? that have like polyester batting inside. Once you wash them, you might take them out of the wash, and instead of like the nice flat fluffy batting on the inside, there's like clumps of it everywhere. It's separated from the agitation and the heat, and it wasn't either, I mean, it could be low quality as well, polyester batting, or it wasn't quilted within the correct spacing to hold the batting flat. Okay, so that's where that issue comes in. But on quilt batting, it's cotton, like this one, for example, is all cotton. So you just got to read the instructions on the one that you're using, because it may have different spacing requirements if it's polyester, if it's cotton and polyester, if it's bamboo, if it's wool. So always just read the packaging on yours. Now, when it comes to something like this, because it is 100% polyester, this stuff is not going to fall apart like that. So it just needs to be put behind the fabric and eventually just end up in between the layers, okay? Laura's asking, could you repeat the name of that spray again? I couldn't catch it. It's made by Sulky, and it's just called KK2000, okay? So this is a piece of fabric, and I cut a matching piece of that sew-in interfacing. Okay, depending on the project, like if it's a bag or some home deck project or something that you're making, it's going to tell you, when it calls for the interfacing, you put this on top and then you're going to stitch it. You either leave out the seam allowance from the interfacing if it's too bulky sometimes, so that it still gets caught in between the layers, but you're not stitching through the actual interfacing and adding that additional layer of bulk. But this is kind of a little bit more intermediate to advanced, right? You're just going to follow the directions on whatever pattern you're using. But if you are maybe changing up the interfacing on a project that you're making, this is how it would be. Like, it needs to be caught between layers somehow. So whether you're going to baste it, and that's what I'll do with this one, I'm just going to baste it, say a longer stitch, 3.5, and we'll put it where? Like at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just making sure that we're going around the edge and catching that interfacing in the stitching. So you could either baste, or sometimes it'll have you put another piece of fabric on top and catch that interfacing in between the two layers, and then you leave a hole somewhere, and you flip it out, something like that. But something medium weight like this that is doesn't need to be fused, I'll show you, and it's pretty crisp. So that medium weight hand on it is pretty crisp. It's not really going to bend and flop. It's not super stiff like a Peltex, which is another Pellon product that's really stiff, and I use a lot for fabric postcards. Scissors. That I use a lot for fabric postcards and things like that. That one comes in a sew-in, it comes in a one-sided fusible, and it comes in a double-sided fusible. But this, for example, would be something like this. Maybe they have you trim it down close to the outer edge so you can reduce some bulk. And then maybe this gets positioned inside of, some other layers or a pocket or whatever it is that you're making. But now it's taken that one piece of fabric and made it into a stiffer piece of fabric, okay? And usually the non-woven ones that are 100% polyester like this, they usually don't pucker or wrinkle to where you can see it separating, because it's pretty crisp. And as you can see, I haven't even pressed this or anything, and it's staying pretty straight. So for a pocket, for the exterior of something, this would work really well. If you wanted to do some decorative stitching through it, you could quilt it just like if it was batting. And so you would just do whatever your design is, stitching through the layers. And in that case, you're going to be adding two things: the bulk of whatever the weight of that sew-in interfacing is, and you're going to be adding additional weight with the thread and the stitching. Because remember, the more stitching you have, the stiffer the finished product is going to be, because that thread obviously adds weight and structure. Okay, let me grab a sip of water. Okay, now I hope that helps. Let's see. Zena says, oh, I never heard the explanation before as to why you needed to sew and quilt it at a specific distance. Thanks, Vanessa, for being so thorough with your explanations. Absolutely. That is exactly why. Autumn's asking, how do you figure out how much to charge for a project? Oh my gosh, we could do a whole show just on that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer that here because there's so many different factors, right? It depends on where you live, what the market can handle, and what type of project it is. But great question. Let's see. Okay, now that was Lavana's question. She was asking about that. So hopefully some of those tips that I just shared with using, this is a medium weight. If you were using a lightweight, non-fusible, like a sew-in interfacing, it would be the same thing, okay? And And then she's asking about the overspray. So I haven't really found too much overspray with this one. I do still, when I bring these to like my retreats and classes, I like to have my students spray outside because a lot of people may have issues with stuff being sprayed indoors, but we really never have had an issue with like overspraying. Okay. This one has a small nozzle. I don't know if it's just that, but I don't need to worry too much about overspray. It doesn't like come out a ton like that. Okay. And let's see. Okay, and that was that. So now, let me turn this machine off and remove this, get this off my table so it's not in my way. But now, let's get on to the star of the show. I'm going to move in my new heat press, and I'm going to zoom out. Say what? Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Isn't it cute? It matches the color of my walls. Look. All right. So I got this heat press from HTV Ront. They sent it to me. Some of you may know that we do a lot of community service here in our community, and we often do all the jerseys and stuff for the recreation basketball teams. And so we have other heat presses that we use, but in order to crank out the huge number of double-sided reversible jerseys that we had this year, when HTV Ront reached out and said they wanted to send me one of these for me to review and try out, I was like, let's do it. So I wanted to share this with you because as someone who has another, the first press that we got was maybe 200, 250 bucks on Amazon. I don't know how many years ago, ages ago. We used that one for a long time. Then we invested in like a $800 one from Stalls. Then it was from Stalls, like a big heat press manufacturer or whatever. So we got like an $800 one. And that's the one that we mostly use because it has a swing away arm. So you don't have to worry about burning yourself, okay? Well, this one is their auto heat press, and we have links to this item. I know several of you already have it because I posted it on Facebook and on Instagram a couple weeks ago, and people were like, I have that one. I just got it. I got it for Christmas. They love it. I was super excited to try it out, and I wanted to share with you how it works and how we can use it as sewists, okay, and quilters and crafters. If you have a Cricut, you already know you probably have your own heat press, okay? But let's check it out. One of the first things that impressed me the most of this thing is how long it takes to heat up. So I have it off, okay? It's not on. It's totally cold. And so I told my husband, I'm going to leave it off because I want to turn it on camera so they can see how quick it heats up. The more expensive heat press that we have, what do you say, 15 minutes? 15 to 20 minutes to heat up, to come up to temperatures to like 365. So this one, I want to show you, we're going to do a couple things. If you make bags, you know how much time we spent fusing cotton fabric to cotton woven fusible interfacing, okay? This is Bosel Fashion Fuse. You probably have either that you've got from our shop or Pelon SF101, right? A thin, this is just 100% cotton with fusible dots on the back. You know that we have to fuse a lot of items, and so a press comes in super, super handy. So that's what we're gonna do here, and then I'll show you something else. We're gonna do a little quick project with a transfer on a tote bag. Neither one of these, I didn't cut these out with my Cricut, but you could do the same thing with heat transfer vinyl if you have a Cricut, a Silhouette, or some other electronic die cutting machine, okay? So I turned this on. I'm gonna press temp, and I have it set to come up to temp to 345. Can y'all see that? 345, and I know the screen is blinking like that. It's just because it's camera. So I have the temp set to, I want it to get up to 345 degrees, and I'm gonna do 6 seconds for interfacing. That's it. So right now, it's coming up to temp, and it's in Fahrenheit. If you wanna use Celsius, all you gotta do is press and hold the thermometer button, and you'll see it switch to Celsius, okay? So I'm gonna press it back to Fahrenheit, because we're in America. Okay, and then you go up and down. So if I wanted to change the temperature here, I just press, oops, I went back to Celsius, sorry. I'm holding it too long. If I press a thermometer, now it blinks the temperature and you increase in 5-degree increments. So I can go up to 360, 375, whatever I want to do for my project. What did I have it at? 335, 345, it's not gonna matter. Either one of those temps is gonna work fine for what we're doing here. So I set it to there and I just leave it on the temp I want. It blinks a little bit more and then it kind of remembers, okay, we're heating up to that temp. So when you see 159 degrees here, this is the current temperature of the heating thing here, the heating unit at the top of this. But you can see that it's increasing and it comes up to temp so fast. I feel like 4 minutes. Well, the first time we did it, we were like, it's already hot enough? Geez. Look, Now, the time, there has a little clock here, so you can set it because it's an auto heat press. You don't have to be sitting here counting down, and when it starts beeping, let it loose like a lot of the heat presses, like the other two heat presses that we have. So instead, you can walk away. You could be working on the next project, prepping the next t-shirt, doing the next thing, and when it runs out of the time, after it presses, if it's 10 seconds you set it for, after the 10 seconds, it just lifts the heating plate off of your project, so you don't have to worry about scorching it, melting it, or burning it because you couldn't get to the press in time to release it. Does that make sense? So it's awesome. So that was temperature. We have the timing here, and then it has like all these different modes and stuff. I don't play around with that yet because the projects that we were doing over and over and over again that we did hundreds of, uh, we had it at the same temperature and the same time. So it was just, we didn't have to do anything. So anyways, the plus and the minus is for going up and down for temp and time. The R button here is what we're going to press when we want it to press down, but this is the funnest part. Let me scoot this up so y'all can see. It's a little drawer, and you pull it out. You put what you want on here. You slide it in, and then you press the R button to get it to start. So I'm going to leave it like this so y'all can see all of it while I do this, okay? So I have here, it's about a 15-inch by 15-inch piece of cotton fabric. This would be a great way to interface your fat quarters if you're making a bunch of little small pouches, zipper bags, little keychain wallets, all those types of little projects that y'all know I have a gazillion tutorials and video courses on. Linda's asking, how did you know the temp on the interfacing? So you can actually play around with it. Some people online have it set to their own settings. I went off of when I've used the heat, like a temperature gun on the bottom of my iron. I know that at the highest cotton setting is like 400 degrees, and that's on my hottest iron. It's super, super hot. And I know that I can still heat and press the interfacing at like 350 degrees, 375. So I'm doing like, what did I say, 335, 340? Because this is adding not just the heat, but the pressure on top. So it's like if you took your iron and kind of leaned on it like that and applied pressure with less heat, you're still going to be able to adhere it. So we're going to go with that. And you can always play around with it. Do a little sample piece. If you see that it's not really stuck on, increase the time or increase the temp. And the temperature for me, I switch it based on the type of fabric that I'm working on. So when we're doing these thin polyester mesh jerseys, we go by what the transfer says, but we put a protective sheet on top. So either butcher paper, parchment paper, or it's not in here, it's out there. It's a Teflon pressing sheet. Something like that would help, especially if you're going to be pressing a lot of interfacing to fabric, okay? Hi, Jamie. She says, hey, Vanessa, I've had my eye on that heat press. I can't wait to hear what you think of it. I'm joining late. Awesome. No problem. So we're getting started, and you can see it's already at 336. Can you see right there? You heard that beep? That means it's up to temp already. I'm sorry, but if you have another heat press, you know that those things take forever to heat. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pull out the drawer, and I'm going to position my fabric. This is just cotton, so I can hit it even with higher temps. Like I mentioned, my iron gets way hotter than 340, what we have ours set at here. And then just double check that your interfacing is scratchy side facing up, right? Because that's where the dots of adhesive are. We want that part to stick to the back of our fabric. And ideally, I would have butcher paper, parchment paper, or that Teflon sheet on top of here. But we're just going to show y'all how this goes. So now I slide it in. I press this, and it auto goes down. It's setting pressure. You can tell by the way it pressed down here. So it goes, I had it for 6 seconds. We'll see if that's enough time. And you see that when the 6 seconds runs out, it lifts itself up. So I could be doing something else and not worried about this burning, okay? Because it was just right. So I can tell that it is, look at that, fused all the way to where it reached. This little bit was hanging off the edge. Can you see that? But every bit, like down to the exact edge of where the look at this, right to the curved edge of where this was is fused. Only the bits that was hanging off are not. Isn't that wild? Like the most even pressure here. This is amazing. The back end, same thing. Look at that. And you can literally see it. It's like a curved edge. So every bit of the whole pressing mat surface here is pressed. So for a piece this big, all you would do is kind of do, you know, half of it, then put it back in there and do the other half. So if you were pressing, say, a whole fat quarter with interfacing, that's how I would do it. So actually what I'm going to do, since this edge had the most hanging out, I'm going to position it like this, press it back in, and you saw that at 340 for 6 seconds. And so you don't have to keep lifting and applying pressure, because that stuff, woo, when you do hundreds of transfers like that, like we do here, it is hard on the shoulders, okay? But look at that. That whole piece. And you know, to do this with an iron would take you more than those 12 seconds, okay? So around the edges, you could do it. And because it's cotton, you can keep putting it in there, right? If you were layering stuff up, you could just keep putting it in there, pressing it, putting it in there, pressing it, and nothing is gonna happen. It's not gonna burn because I'm not putting it at that high of a temperature, right? I can just keep pressing it until I know all the edges are fused into place. So Windless Originals is asking, how big is it under the press? This is a 15 by 15 surface is what it's marketed as, a 15-inch by 15-inch press, which the other ones we have are the same size too. So that's one way for fusing your interfacings. Isn't that amazing? So, so cool, okay? For prepping your projects, assembly line style works great. The transfer here, what did we have to set these ones at, Brandon? 365 or 335? Yeah, 335. So we'll leave it at 340, and then 12 seconds, right? Yeah. So we'll go for 12 seconds. And so these are like commercially bought transfers that we have for the Recreation Sports League that my husband is in charge of here locally. And so I'm just going to show y'all, in case you don't do bags or you don't use fusible interfacing, if you do craft projects like this, it's awesome. I just have a blank canvas tote bag here. And this is one of the things, right? Everything has its pros and cons. Oh, hi Mirta. She says, wow, it saves a lot of time. And seeing Mirta's name, because she's been with me for years, she's been to retreats of mine and everything, I just remembered. I actually have another heat press that is an Elna heat press, and it was designed and made for sewists, specifically for garments. It has like all these different pieces and stuff. And that one cost me, I want to say like $750. And it does, it covers the space of like 10 irons. I think that's what Tim had told me when I bought it. Like it's as much in one press as covering like 10 irons, but it's way bigger, it's longer, wider, takes up way more counter space. And I'm looking at it right there at the bottom of a shelf. That thing is collecting dust, y'all. It does not work as good as this. I'm gonna tell you that right now. So here's the one con that I see to this auto heat press. I love everything about it. It's great, easy on the body. You can take it out, press it in. It has auto pressure because it, depending on how thick whatever it is that you're putting on here, it's gonna press enough pressure to get it down. But this area here, okay, back here, first of all, let me just show you all this. This little pad, it has like little hooks on the bottom so you can take this off and change out the pads. Sometimes people have bulkier projects, so they get thinner pads or harder pads, depending, you know, on the projects that they're working on. So far, I haven't had to change this for all different types of transfers. But this is the part. Whatever you drape over here, so I know a lot of people, if you do a lot of hoodies, like you sell them or you gift them or something, a hoodie is going to be the main issue here because that hood needs to fit in back here. And then when you press this drawer in, it's going to get caught back here. So sometimes it doesn't let you fully close it because it needs to drape over here. But I've seen a lot of people who have found workarounds for that by either draping it sideways and kind of pulling the sleeve off to the side. If you're doing that, you can do that. I've also done it, I think on some of the larger jerseys, I was able to put, I had to do like a logo thing underneath the numbers. And so instead of doing it from the top down, I loaded it upside down so that the bottom hem was up here. And then I just, you know, applied the transfer upside down. It was way easier because the bulk of the length of the jersey was then hanging off the front edge here. So, I mean, there's ways around that, but if that's all you do is hoodies, I wouldn't get this because it's not for you, right? That's not the ideal situation. If you want to press quilt squares, quilt blocks, like Windless Original says, ideal. Can you imagine those of us quilters with 12.5-inch blocks? Pop, press it, keep it moving, get the other one loaded, take it out, put it on there. That would be awesome. All right, so let's try this. So for example, on this tote bag, the handles are up here, right? I could go like this and kind of drape this under here, but I don't want to run the risk of that getting caught back there when I push the drawer closed. So instead, something like this is what I was just mentioning. I'm going to flip it and position it upside down. Do you see this? So the handle is going this way. So all I got to do is remember, where did I put the transfer? It fell. Is to position my transfer upside down. So the top of my transfer is here. And I'm just going to go like this. Center that there. And that's it. I'm going to close it, set it, and forget it. Okay? So yes, it's not ideal for all types of projects, but for stuff like this where it's just like one and done, you're putting this down there, interfacing in chunks and pieces, quilt blocks. What else? Heat transfer vinyl, if you're cutting cute things to put on t-shirts and everything, that would work out great. So there you see it. Little tote bag. You can take these with you, Brandon, when you take it to the gym. Anything that you're carrying in there. And so that's the name of the organization. That's the logo right there. Easy peasy. Okay? And that's it. Wasn't that super fast and easy? So for t-shirts, for bags, for little pouches, for those of you that maybe sew and then cut out stuff with your Cricut or your Silhouette, you can add things onto it. So for example, if I made something with this type of a fabric, and actually this is a cotton chambray, I'm going to press this real quick just so that we can press it flat. I hate to see wrinkled fabric, but I don't have an iron plugged up because an iron in this will probably trip my breaker. So here's another thing. Instead of waiting the full 12 seconds, you can press that R again and break the time cycle from where it auto stops, right? And I can just press it again and it will stop right when I press it. So there it is. And this fabric kind of curls a little bit because it's a loosely woven cotton chambray. But you can see we could put our interfacing right there. Boom, boom. Hit the whole thing on and fuse it. Super, super cool. I'm kind of obsessed. So anyway, I'll turn it off now, but it's not as heavy as like my 75-pound presses either. It's a lot lighter. I don't know how heavy it is, maybe 35, 40 pounds, something like that, I think, but way lighter compared to the other ones, and it's so, so cute. Anyway, my affiliate links on where you can get this, both on Amazon and at the HTV Ront shop, like their online page, their main e-commerce shop, is in the caption on Facebook and in the video description box below if you're watching us on YouTube. So you can check it out there. I think I put the Amazon link and they're running one of those like flash sale things on Amazon. I kind of like it. And if you want to see me do a Cricut video and use the heat press, let me know in the comments below because I'm thinking I may whip up something like that coming up here soon. Okay? Witless Original says, okay, I said I didn't need it. I need it. She says, I don't. Originally you had said, I don't need it, but I want it. And now she says, I need it. Listen, I love the gadgets, and I'm telling you, I have 2 other presses that are way more expensive than this, and I'm obsessed. Maybe it's just the color. Maybe it's how cute it is, but I definitely know it's because one of the things, it's way easier on my body. And we have, I mean, we've done, what, over 270 jerseys, double-sided. We split up the work. My husband and I, he was on the other press, I was on this one, and we just got to work quick, quick, quick. So, I mean, in a couple of weeks, I've put this baby to work. And I've done heat transfer vinyl stuff that we cut out with the Cricut because we had to put some sponsor names on the back of the jerseys. We've done the commercial screen print jersey or transfers on jerseys. We've done a ton, and I'm gonna tell you what, this thing is the bomb. Okay. Okay, I see some of you are asking for that Cricut video. If you want to see me do some Cricut videos with the heat press thing on here and using heat transfer vinyl, awesome. Yeah, so I will work on that because I see several of you are requesting that. Awesome. Well, good. All right. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and for those of you that submitted questions, remember there is a link to a form that you can fill out and submit your questions so that I can consider answering them in a future episode of WIP Wednesday. I hope y'all picked up some tips today, things that you'll try out on your own projects, and if you're looking for a heat press, use my link. They have it in white and in this little, they call it blue, but it's like a minty cutesy aqua-ish color. It's super cute. All right, so I'll be working on more videos on this and seeing how I can incorporate my Cricut projects. I may do one with the little one, the Cricut Joy. I have the Cricut Maker also, but it's a little bit smaller. That way, some of you, if you've gotten your hands on it, maybe you got one for Christmas, a Cricut Joy or Cricut Joy Extra, which I know is their newest one. It's a little bit bigger than that little one, but smaller than the big one. I'll do something with that so we can see, you know, how sewists can use it to still, you know, add a little something to our craft projects, okay? So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and that you find time to do something fun and creative for yourself. I will see y'all next week. And thanks again for tuning in. Bye, everybody.